Okay, thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Conrad Agramont. I'm the CEO here at Agile IT. Really looking forward to this topic and sharing some information with everybody. This topic really came across as we've done a number of conversations with customers, both who we've brought on for certain projects or ongoing services. Others just having a conversation, and there are some common themes that typically come up, and those that we feel that would be great to share with everybody today. So let's get started. First of all, it's always good that for everybody here to just know a little bit about our vision. It tells you a little bit about who we are. So really one of the main ones is we feel that we really want to build a community of managed service customers. So these are customers that we really want to work with every single day, working with their business. So as you see, as I talk today throughout, what we do for security, performance, or operations, that these are things that are applicable to everybody. It's why we want to kind of share with the broader community. But these are things that we deeply care about for our customers, and we actually want our customers to speak with one another as well, so they can learn from their own business practices as well. And then really thinking about IT services and cloud services beyond just the IT department. So there's a lot of needs in the other parts of the business, whether they're doing data analytics or they're doing e-commerce or supply chain management, healthcare record management. All of those things tend to focus back on the IT infrastructure that's provided. Doesn't mean that it's like in the old days where you had to provide all that hardware, but it's still providing those services in a variety of ways. And as we go through this, you'll learn a little bit more. So one of the things that we find a lot of customers, either you're very early in the evaluation phase in terms of your path along Azure, and you could be doing this on Amazon Web Services, but the focus of this is really around Azure. And as you're moving down from an idea to running it to really looking forward, most people go through these kind of common stages, if you will, but they tend to hit these roadblocks, either a roadblock or it's a speed bump or they got to go around a few trees or rocks. At the end of the day, there's something that kind of gets in their way. Very common IT projects all across the board. But when you focus on the cloud, there's some very common themes that people are looking at. First off, when you're looking at, you've gone through an evaluation, maybe you've set up a hybrid deployment. And our view of hybrid in this for this topic is, you're using the public cloud, Azure, up in Microsoft facility. You've created a secure tunnel, IPsec, VPN, point-to-point, or from your one-to-many environments to Azure's one-to-many environments in their data centers. And you've put some servers up there and you're running it. You may have done them through migrations because you have some old hardware and you needed to move them, or you needed more capacity, but you haven't done everything yet, and that's fine. You could stay that way forever. The second one is hybrid 2, really, which is same kind of basic environment, but now I've put on brand new servers into the cloud, and I've done that because we have new application needs. It's one of the reasons why we did this. We didn't have capacity to do all the things that we wanted. But then we get a bill after, let's say, the 3rd, the 6th, the 9th, 12th month, and we start to look at our costs and think, whoa, this was great that we got all these advantages and capabilities, but we're spending a lot more money than we thought. Very typical, and one of the reasons, it's not because cloud is bad or on-prem is better or on-prem is bad and cloud is better. It's really just that managing your costs and the capabilities that you need are different in the cloud. You have to think about things a little bit differently. In the past, you could just buy a disk, stick it in, and that was your cost, but you fail to think about, well, the performance of the disk. So what if they die, or what if I need to move them? So there's kind of the swap between performance and cost, or flexibility and cost. And then there's kind of the next generation. What are we doing in the future to really make sure that we can deliver the things we want and manage our costs accordingly? But there also needs to be some changes in the business. So the other reasons why you stall, a very common one, is around security. We put some things up there that we felt were important, but maybe it just didn't need to be as secure. But as we need to put more and more things in there, or as we need to be more compliant, or even if it isn't compliance, maybe there's just good corporate governance that we need to facilitate. There's a lot of concerns of what is it there. If you start with the kind of simple approach with a credit card, or you did one project, you can't look at everything you do in the same way. Some things need high performance, some need low balancing, some need to be on all the time, some things don't need to be on all the time. So you start to think about, is the firewall it? Because that's what I did when I was on-prem. I may have had some IP gateways that might have assisted, but those are the things that I normally had in front of me. Was a firewall, some antivirus, maybe some other IP gateways, and now I'm doing that in the cloud, and man, that just doesn't feel like it's secure enough. And you're right, it really is not enough. I'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. Performance. So when you deploy the first time, you may have done it quickly. You may have done it in a way that met your expectations of performance and cost at that time, but in 6 months it changes. Either you don't need that much performance or you need more. Your view of the cost, what was cheap now is now expensive later on, or vice versa. So, it's one of those things that you have to constantly evaluate, and I'll talk more about that as we go along. And then the last kind of third bullet is really around cost and things kind of getting messy. Again, cost control is always very, very important here, because it can run away and then you feel like the promise that you were going to get out of the cloud wasn't there, or your deployment performance plus cost wasn't really there. So there's some things that you have to do ongoing, and not even month to month. Some things require day to day. Not so much as you have to look at it day to day, but you create these controls that looks at it every day and every hour to do it for you. And again, I'll talk about kind of the key tips. So what I'm going to do is, starting off with this basic slide here, these are the 3 buckets I'm going to fill things in. So as we start talking through some of the other capabilities within Azure that you can use to solve a lot of these problems, I'll start putting some sub bullets in here, and at the end we'll have kind of a nice list for you to kind of take on your own and think, hey, how do I solve that? Or have I evaluated? Have I deployed it? Have I done that? And those are things that at Agile IT we'd love to do for you or with you. If you're a customer of ours, contact us, and if we haven't already or done the latest quarterly briefing with you, and we'd love to get engaged. If you're not a customer, you're interested and want to learn more, please reach out and talk at any time. Anyway, so these are the 3 main areas that we're going to go through. So first off, the quick evolution. And the reason this is important is just kind of knowing where you came from. So if you were on premises today, or you were before, you had a lot of questions you had to ask. Where how do I scale this app? Where are the physical boxes? Which OS do I use? Some of these things I feel are applicable, as you move up or here to the right. And you start to change a little bit of your areas of concern, because you're not so much worried about power and ping and pipe. You're concerned about other things. So moving to an infrastructure as a service, which is very common. Many enterprises start that way. Small businesses move that way. It could be the right solution for you forever. But depending on your needs and what you're trying to do, you may need to continue, move up the chain a bit. So the other one is platform as a service. Now, platform as a service is very different, because there's other areas you're not so much concerned about the server and its patching, or the OS updates and what it needs, and that the care and feeding that goes in that environment. Now you kind of think a little bit more abstracted. What are the services that I use? How do I deploy and scale them? And sometimes you might feel like, well, I'm not building web applications, so maybe that's not a concern for me. And I don't think that's necessarily true. More and more services are actually being stored. So if you look at Box, one of the things that Box has is, hey, if you were using the Box interface, now they've actually came out and created a partnership with Microsoft where the content of your Box actually goes into Azure. So a lot of really interesting things that are happening around, even for file storage. This is a topic for a future webinar, but for file storage is something called Azure Files. And one of the nice things that they provide this syncing capability between branch offices, so you can have servers deployed in different branch offices, and Azure will take care of all the syncing. So if you can think of those that used to do, I'm losing my train of thought here, file replication services within Windows Server. Now the Azure service is doing that, but all the content gets stored in blob storage, so not really putting things in a replicated file server. You have a file service, and then it can replicate to different places. So more and more from the vendors, either be it Microsoft or Box or whomever else, they're going to be going towards this direction, and you have to know how to then govern, manage, and secure those as well. Anyway, and then the next piece, the place where if you have anybody in your organization that's creating custom applications or doing automation or providing scheduled tasks or resources, serverless really is the next generation for those types of applications or tools or automation. So some of the scenarios that you would see for serverless, It could just be back-end operations. It could be real-time bot messaging, so that's starting to become very popular. And these are things that I think you'll find that IT organizations, even ourselves, are looking to do more automation and processing through. Because at the end of the day, I can provide these services, I can make them scale, I can provide rich capabilities, and not actually have to deploy 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 servers and think about the load balancing. Still many places where you have to, or you may need to, but it's something more to think about in your architecture moving forward. The reason why I say this is important is if you just did a lift and shift with your application, or your internal developers, or your contractors, or third-party people that are building things for you, or you're going to consume, these are things you want to push them. Like, hey, can we already have this .NET application, or our Python, or Node.js, or a PHP application. Why can't we run that in a serverless environment? Why can't we leverage that? There may be good reasons, but we really start to have to drive that question, and that'll help out. So when you look at the kind of pizza box stacks, from left to right, this is kind of what we've been talking about. So in the blue area, typically things of your concern, and then the yellow, or the bottom ones there as you move to the right, are areas that are by the vendor. So in this case, it would be Microsoft in the Azure environment, which is the vendor that would provide that stack. If you're a managed customer of one of ours, those are things we work on together where, let's say it was infrastructure as a service, we would still manage, anywhere from the OS all the way up to part of the application, depending on what it might be. So again, these are some of the things to consider when you're planning out your roadmap. You may be running into challenges now, but the answer might be using some of these new higher valued services above. So in terms of the cost and the messiness, applications will really start to leverage resources beyond just what comes as infrastructure as a service. So again, you kind of have to expand out and what's there. And as we go through this, I'll talk more about those things beyond just serverless. Serverless is cool, but there's a lot of other areas that you can have, AppLogic and Flow and all these other kind of services that could help you out. Okay, so the next really topic here is around security and management. So one of the things that has made Microsoft particularly strong in their cloud infrastructure is, they have a long background of deploying applications in enterprise environments. In certain scenarios, it used to be challenging. They just couldn't do everything well, or they didn't all work well together. You may have had an enterprise infrastructure, but then you had to buy System Center, and it was like almost doubling your infrastructure just to manage your other infrastructures. It became really hard, and just to deploy it and configure it, keep it up and going. You were kind of managing 2 sets of infrastructures. The nice thing with what's available now inside of Azure is Microsoft just does all that stuff for you. They run it, they provide the service, they continue to innovate and deploy, and really your focus has to be on defining your policies, building this into your own practice and operations to make sure that you're constantly making sure that things are deployed in the way that you want, managed the way that you want, secured the way that you want. It's still a job to do all that. However, now you're focused on enabling, managing, and auditing versus deploying, patching, updating, and learning the underlying technology and processes and network flow and all the costs associated with those things. So for me, I'm really excited by the advancements that they've done that. And really the cool things, and I'll try and call them out as we go along, not all of it has to be in the cloud. You could use a lot of these same security services, log analytics, for things that you have deployed on premises as well. So you can have one environment that you manage things on-prem, in the cloud. If you have System Center as well, Microsoft has done a lot of investment to make sure that System Center works with this. If you have a service like Splunk and you wanted to say, hey, I have all this data in Azure, can I get the data into Splunk? The answer is yes, and more. So other providers. So it's really exciting what they're doing, both with their own investments and the partnerships that they have together. So one thing is for sure, when you look at security, both for what Microsoft provides and also with customers and in the right box there, that would be either yourself or the Agile IT and yourself, or Agile IT yourself and another third party. We all kind of work together. At the end of the day, we're all responsible for pulling this thing together. So if you're a compliance customer in health or finance or anything like that, there's a compliance manager where it's a new service available from Microsoft, and it's very interesting because they put in one place where they show all the places where they're complying for certain regulatory areas, and then they have the other responsibilities on top that we get to put in there. Here we get to upload a document that says, well, here's how we satisfy these areas in that stack, so an auditor can see the whole stack, both from what we provide, you know, non-Microsoft to what Microsoft provides underneath. So it's really nice to see all of that together. And Microsoft's done a huge investment around compliancy. So if that's something that you require, you know, lots of other talks there to talk about compliancy. Anyhow, you know, just focus on, you know, if you think about Azure as just a place where you run a server, you're really missing all of the other things that it does, both in delivering these higher valued services for mobile devices and indexing and artificial intelligence and those sort of things. Those are kind of the fun bits, right? Everybody likes those. But if you're an IT person, you're a security person, you're in cost management, these are the sorts of things that investment that Microsoft's been doing that really, really are important to you, right? Because you really care about the operations. Hey, do I have good backups? Am I encrypting at rest? Am I transporting in an encrypted way? Can I make sure I can do end-to-end, you know, SSL and security management? You know, can I do vulnerability assessments of what I have in here? Is Microsoft helping me in threat intelligence? I'll talk about some of these areas as we move along. But the one thing you should take away from this is that while this list is, you know, pretty healthy and a good list to look at, there's way more stuff than this. And it seems like every other day, one thing I'll point out here in a little bit, as we talk about load balancing, they make more investments. So something came out 2 days ago, specific on web application security. So I'll talk about that briefly. But things are always happening, so you really have to kind of keep up to date with what's happening. And it's not like they're changing features in your favorite Word, you know, in Word, and you feel like, oh, it's just bells and whistles. No, they're providing functionality that makes a difference in securing your environment or operating it to make sure that you can continuously provide a service and not, you know, going to be on the front page news in the future. Okay, so one of the first places to really start is the Azure Security Center. So Azure Security Center is a great place to start. You know, I'll actually switch here and just give you a quick little view of this. This is a very simplified deployment. I really only have one box here and a little bit of storage, just so I can go in here and show it. I didn't want to go to my own production information. So here, if I can see that once I'm in Security Center, it's right here in the Azure portal. So once I've logged in, I get some recommendations of things I can do, and I have some reds and greens. So let's take a look at what the red compute's all about. It says that it's I have some endpoint security issues, some missing disk encryption policies. So I'll click on virtual machines. I just have one test one here, you know, because I guess I'm shamelessly plugging myself. Conrad test 1. So if I click there, I can see a little bit more information of what the issue is. Oh, I didn't apply disk encryption. That's high. They're really recommending that I encrypt my disk. You know, that's true. I really should do that. I can even have a policy that enforces that. Teeing you up for a topic here I'm going to cover in a second. But again, if I click into here, it'll tell me what's going on, a little brief description. Click on the link and it tells me how to do that. So now obviously this is a very simple view of it all, but as you have more and more devices that are in here, you get additional information to help you figure out what's happening. It'll give you patching information if there's networking issues that are happening, any security alerts or threat analytics. This is the one I was talking about, enable application whitelisting. So that's again, a fun topic. I already had the link open. But from here, what you can do is you can actually say, hey, for these types of applications, actually let me scroll down here. For these type of applications and these virtual machines, I only really want these applications to run. Let's say it's an application that we've built for, you know, background credit card processing, and it needs to be PCI compliant. And if something happens where somebody has somehow gone in there, maybe an IT person, maybe a developer that's allowed to, maybe it's a hacker, and they run something that's not allowed, I can get notified, or I think it actually prevents it. If you look at the date, again, you know, it's still pretty new. But again, these are the sorts of features that just come out that you have to keep up to date, that says, well, you know, this really would help me out. It would further lock it down. Would it be a pain because every time we deployed something new and there's some new kind of app or something in the background that needs to run or process and I have to go whitelist it again? Okay, it's a pain, but as a security professional or as an IT engineer who really cares about this stuff, like, you want to go through that, because that way you can capture things that normally would wake you up at night, or you would lose data and be on the press and lose your job, and your kids don't like you during Christmas. Anyway, so those are the things you want to prevent. Again, there's more and more things that they're adding into cloud security. Threat intelligence is another area. I just don't have it turned on here for you to demo. But again, this is where Microsoft is helping you looking at what's happening. So they do some artificial intelligence to see, hey, are you getting a lot of traffic happening to your environment from malicious IPs? And you can get notified and aware. So a lot of really cool stuff that's inside of here. All right. So that's one of the starting places. So one key takeaway, you got to go in the Azure Security Center. Go turn some things on. Is it going to cost you? Some things. There's a free tier that has certain capabilities, like threat intelligence actually requires an additional license. Don't quote me on the price, but it's, I think, something like $15 per node. I think that's what it is for the OMS suite. Maybe it's more or less, something like that. But do you need to put on all nodes? I'd recommend it, but you'd want to put it on at least the ones that are more forward-facing, that has public access coming in. At the very, very least. So that was for external access to remote users, or remote, or where you set a VPN, or you have a little bit of supports for a web application, or REST-based services, or serverless things. You want to consider those to be things that you want to put threat intelligence on. All right. Again, System Center is being used by lots of other organizations out here, so this is a nice little proof point. In terms of using Security Center. The other thing that's really nice about what Microsoft's doing with Azure and Security Center is that it's meant to scale. So, right here, I was just clicking on one application, but the reporting has meant that, hey, I can target I can set what my targets are, and I get information, it rolls it up for me. Because one of the challenges that when you have a lot of servers or the devices, you just don't have the time to dig into each one of them, look at the event log, or look at the other logs, turn on tracing. So you really need something that can actually help you along with that, and then roll up anything that they find severe at some point. And it's also bothersome to just set up monitoring. You have to know all the event log codes and types, and whether you need to rack them or not. There's still a lot of that there, but there's a place where System Center and threat intelligence starts to help out. Another area really just around good hygiene, or basic hygiene, we like to say, is that is backup. Now Azure Backup has really grown, and I will tell you one thing. We run backup services for many of our customers. Try to do it for all of them because we just think it's that important. And Azure Backup is a good fit for some places, other it's not. It really just depends on what we're doing. But at the very least, please make sure you are backing things up. But that's only 25% of your work. The other side, 75% of your work, is continue to do test restores. Your backups are meaningless. The only ones you can trust are the ones that you've done test restores. And try and do it in a place that would, in different scenarios, don't just do the same data, the same process, the same steps, because things will let you down. So you got to try different types of resources and different types of locations, and where you can back up an Azure thing, but you want to do a restore in a different data center, spin it back up for whatever reason. You don't know, but you want to try those mechanisms. So really important that you do the restore policies for that. Azure Log Analytics, again, this is one of those services where it can pull content both for all your Azure boxes if you want, as well as your on-premise locations as well. And it really gives you deep insight to what's happening in your environment. If you have something else that's doing the log consolidation, that's great. I would tell you to give this a try. I'll tell you, one of the things that we found is when we're doing both patch management or log analytics, not all the same systems tell you the same things. So we tend to use 2 or 3 different solutions per environment just to see if we can get a complete picture of what's happening. Because sometimes one vendor is getting a little bit ahead of the other one. Sometimes they both tell you the same things, but they represent it in different ways. So I would definitely look at Azure Log Analytics. Really easy. Deploy the agent on the box. If you're in Azure, it can do it for you, I believe. For on-prem, you have to deploy the agent. It finds it, you configure it, and then now you start to pull it. It takes a little while to pull the data because it has to pull it, and then depending on your subscription, I think, but I think they recently changed this, you can dictate how much data you want to collect. Really handy when you're doing somebody's hacked in your environment, you're trying to figure out what happened, why. If you start to turn it on right when it happened, you're just not going to get a lot of good intelligence. So the longer you have it running, at least maybe 2 weeks, maybe 2 months, you start to get really good intelligence for future analytics. All right. So again, Microsoft has been partnering really well. So one of the ones I talked about was Splunk. You can do that. Operations Manager is also a part of this that you can plug into. So the System Center world, in terms of their capabilities, both for on-prem services and working with cloud services and kind of working in conjunction with one another is turning to be quite special. And some places you can do, yeah, well, without the other, but together they're quite powerful. Really a topic for a different day around System Center. All right. One thing that I like to call out is Azure Policy. So it again is also a relatively new service. This is where you get to define policies that you want to both use for audit and enforcement. And so let's take for example, and I'll go back to the previous slide. But you say, I want to be able to control that for this type of subscription that I have, and let's say it's a subscription for my developer crew, and I have another subscription for my production applications, and another subscription for my production customer-facing applications. I have 3 different subscriptions, and I do that for cost management, but I can also apply policies to them. And in those policies, like the developers, why I love them, and they have such an important job to do, they love to try out new toys. And the problem with that is that they might be using a component that's very, very expensive. Then they may have just coded it up. They don't even see the price. They just boom, boom, well, that's interesting. So you could put a policy out there so it can either tell you or you want to enforce it that says, I only want them to have these classes of machines. When it goes into production, maybe I want to up the classes to them. So I can tell what's available within a subscription or resource type. So I have a lot of good control of what I want to do. Same thing for virtual machines and storage accounts. So I have a lot of control over of what I want to have available within those subscriptions, so that way I can again further manage my costs, also follow the policies that we said we were only going to do these type of servers, but I see people using different ones. React to and afterwards, you've already spent the money, so you may want to keep an eye on that and put that in there. You can put other policies in there as well, around patching and OS information as well. So a lot of very cool things in policies. There actually is UI for it now inside of the Azure portal. So if I go in here to policies, I can click on it, and here you have to enlist the subscription that you're in. So here I have Agile IT CSP, so that's my little test domain, and my little credit card one over here. And I already registered, so now I can go ahead and create definitions and apply the policies towards different things. So here's the allowed storage account and allowed resource types, enable automatic OS upgrades and app checks. So again, there's these different policies, and I can apply them towards the different subscriptions. Okay, so that's policies. Again, I think that's a very powerful utility. At the very least, you'd want to go in there and turn it on, put in what you think you should be doing. Maybe you don't put in the enforcement, but you do want to audit it and just see if people are following the rules. So that's great from an IT perspective. Always good to run a policy early. Same thing we do with enterprise management and security suite is you can turn on tips to see, hey, who's following the policy, tell people they're breaking the policy. Okay, they're not following enough. All right, just start enforcing the policy. So these are strategies that you can have for yourself. Again, because sometimes you'll say, hey, our Azure environment's going crazy because I can't enforce these things. Well, now you can, or this is another set of capabilities you can use to do that. Another thing that I find that's really important for organizations is automation. There's a ton of capabilities inside of Azure to automate processes. Some of these things you might have been doing already, whether it's PowerShell internally to build out virtual machines or customize your OS. But now you have to start thinking a little bit broader, because one of the things that we really like about automation is that it allows us to, one, make sure we don't make mistakes, two, to make sure that when we build things, it's in a uniform fashion, and three, it's a good way to enforce policies or architectural structures that we want to implement. So really, these are the 3 key areas of why we think it's really, really important. The thing is that there's lots of different ways to go do it. So if you do PowerShell with desired state configuration, that's a very powerful tool. All of these require just it has a learning curve for some of them. It's a little bit of, quote unquote IT development, so scripting languages, but it's well worth the investment. You think, well, I'm just going to build out, a box one at a time and the domain controllers, but then you look behind you and you have 15 different boxes named a different way, structured a different way, storage accounts created in different ways. They're not all in the same storage account. Virtual disks are created in a different way, in different manner. So again, that's when you look behind that messiness, because when you were looking forward, you were just kind of making decisions on the fly. So again, scripting is really a great way to do that. And there's some other reasons, which I'll talk about in a bit, of why you really want automation to help you manage costs. Okay, so really getting back on track. System Center is a must. Really get in there, look at the security capabilities. Because if security is a big concern, you really have to get to know what's inside of System Center, apply the appropriate agents or services that best fit what you think is needed to both to do what you know is right for your infrastructure, but also to lower down the angst or the anxiety that the business might have with some of those services. So this really provides you the tool and the power to say, no, this is going to be safe. We have even better services now than we did when we were on-prem because it was just too expensive. We couldn't have done that all ourselves. And the other one is around the cost and keeping things messy. So automation is going to be a key to that. Things like Azure Policy is just one of those tools that I think is really powerful that you're going to need to know moving forward. Okay, on the networking side, nothing works unless you can get to it. Right, so networking is fundamental to what you need to do. If you look at Azure, really it's a collection of different data centers, but all the data centers are really isolated. So just because, and by isolation, what I mean is when I create a new environment inside of Azure, and let's say I put it in East 2, or the United States, so US East 2, and I put it in that environment, I can spin up another server in the West, no problem, spin it up. They can't inherently talk to one another. That's by design, and it's good that they do this. Because you have to explicitly put up those rules that say, I want these two networks to talk one another. And part of that is good networking practices of how you want it to connect, what are the permissions and policies, because they could be two different organizations. It could be a collaboration between partners. So you still have that ability to control access and manage that. But there's other things that come into play that you have to keep in mind that sometimes become a deterrent to the performance or the access that you may want to go do. So the one thing that's important is that when you look at Azure as a whole, it's all about software-defined networking. So yes, there's so much that you can accomplish to both through a template or through PowerShell coding, or you can go through through the portal. I find the portal to be nice as kind of a learning aspect, like, oh, you do this, oh, that's what this feature means. But when you really go into production, you really should have scripted it out because it's the one thing you can look back at to say, hey, when we deployed this, how did we do it? I can't replay those screenshots or unless somebody Camtasia'd it or something or screenshot it, which nobody's really going to go do. But you could look at a script. You can say, oh, I see where the error is, and I could actually delete that, recreate it. All the content was stored someplace else, and I'm back to a good state and I've resolved the problem. Versus, well, let me go see what I can fix it by clicking all over the place. Kind of the old method of IT of you got to go in that box, click around, or run some scripts on the box to fix it. Really, you want to be able to kill and recreate, but define it the way you want. Networking is the same way. So you can define what your network is. You need to make an adjustment. You can blast it. There's some other. It's not always that easy. Sometimes you have to get rid of the other resources first and blast it, then reattach them. Again, more scripting. But then now you're managing through this kind of software-enabled network versus anything else. So what you know already most likely is that in these software-defined networks inside of Azure, everything is just what you would normally expect in a network. You have your IPs, you need to set up routes. You can create different subnets. You have to explain how to route between those subnets, what policies and traffic you want to allow through those subnets, traffic that may go to other storage accounts or SQL databases that are also inside the network but outside of your virtual network. So it doesn't remove the need to understand good networking. It also ensures that you are thinking about good networking. Don't just put everything in one flat network and say, hey, well, this seems too wide open. Well, you have the ability to create this segmentation. You can have these virtual machines that are dual NICed. You can control the ports. You can control the routes. You can control so much that's in there. I'll say this: 2 years ago, Microsoft in Azure, the routing capabilities and structure, like they didn't do ranges as well. They had NICs, but they were dual NICs, but it could only be used for certain things. Much better now. So they allow for more kind of these more complicated, complex environments that really fit what a lot of enterprises need or kind of custom applications need. And even the things they don't have, I tell everybody, well, if you can work around it or deal with what's there, get started, because most likely in 3 or 6 or 9 months, what you're asking for is going to be there, either in exactly the way you wanted it or in a different type of architecture, but it makes sense for the type of things you're going to move towards anyway. So look towards that investment If you looked at this 2 years ago or a year ago or 3 years ago, man, how different it is. So give it another shot. In terms of networking, there's lots of different ways to make it highly available. Just because I get one server, put it in the cloud, doesn't mean my one server is infinitely scalable. I want it to be. I hope I build my application to be able to do that, but I have to start thinking about other kind of strategies. So there's these different types of load balancers that are available for Microsoft, and here I'll just generically call them all load balancers, but they perform different types of functions. Like as your traffic manager, somebody's trying to go to your new site, you could say, hey, what region are they coming from? I need to direct them towards a deployment that I have that's closer towards their locale for better performance, less hops, if you will. These two load balancers, if you look at them in the purple and left and right there, one could be in the Azure data center. The other one can actually be in your own office. It could be in Amazon. It could be Rackspace. It could be wherever it wants. Traffic manager really just doesn't care less. We use this a lot for our ADFS deployments, Active Directory Federation Services deployments, where when they come in, we may want to have one of those servers or a pair of those servers running in Azure and another pair running on site. You may want it on site because once you disconnect the network, you may still want to access those services for people to use, and there's other networking tricks you can do that. Anyway, traffic manager just really doesn't care where it goes. The load balancer, so level 4 load balancing, and then you have the application gateway, which is level 7 load balancing. Again, provides more services downstream for what you might need. So depending on what type of load balancing you want, are you looking for this because like you need more session state management? That's more the application gateway than the load balancer. So you really have to think about what your strategy is. So again, it's not like, oh, I put 1 or 2 boxes and stick a load balancer and I'm good, right? The answer is, well, what scenarios are you trying to prevent, right? Are you trying to prevent high availability, low hops, higher performance against different regions, one application space, like you go to Microsoft.com, you're not going to one server, you're hitting something closer to. You can use a CDN, a content delivery network. So lots of different strategies you can use for this. So it's important to know that this functionality is there. The reason I bring it up here in terms of stumbling is you may have run to a place where there were some high availability issues, and you didn't get the exact load balancing you expect, or you do want to have an application you put in the cloud, and you're thinking, well, just putting load balancer in one data center, is that enough? The answer is no. You need to do traffic manager. You need to do load balance manager. And if you need, you don't have to have, but if you need the application gateway, it's there for you. The application gateway does other cool things for you. Does end-to-end SSL, so you can actually terminate the SSL connection at the application gateway, and it could just pass on the content to the VM, so offloading the SSL. It can also remap it, so it can terminate there. And then still send a secure message down the virtual machine. So lots of cool strategies you can do there. It just depends on your need and what functionality you want to have. The other one is really around health of the environment. So Azure Monitor provides some built-in metrics and utilization. I'll say this, if you have developers, so it's going to provide some base information around your storage and your compute, around your monitoring, but you can also provide other instrumentation inside of your application itself to provide more tips into the Azure Monitor. So the Azure Monitor service can understand, hey, your application might be hitting at 20% utilization, but it's moving slower and slower and slower inside of the actual application. Why is that? Well, you need to instrument your application to provide tips to the monitoring service to say, to provide information of when things are good and when they're not good, so that you can monitor them together. Now, those are things, enhancements you can put in your application or your code or your tools or your scripts that help provide that kind of unified information, because Azure doesn't know what your application thinks. It might think, it's thinking, hey, I'm at 20%, and your application is hung because somebody has a thread that's what is like a singleton or something, right? That there's just a single thread that can perform the applications, and you didn't know that you're only getting like one action a second versus the 10,000 that you thought you'd have. But there was some problem in the code, or there's something that was written that broke that assumption. Anyway, these are things that you can do. So again, other areas that you should really look at is the Resource Health and Azure Monitor. There's some new capabilities. It's called Network Watcher. And essentially, this gives you a much lower view of IP traffic. So if you feel like, well, how do I ping or see traffic moving between virtual machines inside of my network? Are things functioning as fast as they can? In the past, there was just no way to do it. You would just do a regular ping and say, well, it's telling me this, but you couldn't really get to the low level. So the Network Watcher really provides that insight between your networks and inside of your virtual machines. Speaking about networks, networking costs is always a challenge. The one thing to make note of is that ingest or data that goes into Azure is always free. You know, when it goes out, I think it's egress, that's when you get charged. But if you do network out within the same zone, you actually don't get charged for it. Right? There's these different zones, which is another topic, but something to take a look at, which is, you know, it's hard to create an estimate around network traffic. You have no idea. A lot of times you don't know how much traffic your application is pumping out. I'll say this, that you can control that, and these are places where an application or caching schemes, like what I was talking about for Azure Files, where caching helps, you know, local, you know, wire speed performance for data that you have on-prem, but you can still have things replicated to the cloud, and now people are just accessing things much faster. You have less data that's going up and down to the cloud, so you get to save money. So again, understanding these mechanisms has a very, very big impact to your costs. So again, networking architecture for scale up and scale out makes a difference for performance. You know, being able to look at your Resource Health, Azure Monitor, Network Watcher are other areas that you can take a look at the network performance and see if that's the place that's getting bottlenecks or not. All right, I have a few more things to cover. I'm almost done. Probably got about, I'll probably to get it close to the wire here. But I think we can make it. All right, I know I'm talking about a lot of things, but there's so much to cover. So compute costs, what's important to note is that where you may have started for your application, you may not need. So a lot of people have started out with the A, like A4, very popular, things like 4 gigs or something like that, very good for domain controllers. But now they're you know, Microsoft keeps coming up with new versions. Now they're named in a way to kind of give you a hint of where things are. Like there's a new M-class service, higher memory capabilities, because maybe your application you're using doesn't really require a lot of computing, but requires lots and lots of memory. So there's a place you're using it. Now, what you really also have to think about is, in the old days, you would say, oh, I need a box with a lot of memory, and you would buy it. But you really only need it, let's say, towards the end of the month, or you only need it on demand for things that you need to run, because you need all that memory. Because let's say we're going to run a end of the month or end of the quarter job, and it requires, you know, getting all this data, stick it in memory. SQL servers are very common for this, or you can be going towards NoSQL solutions that are very memory intensive. And so you could spin up the box. You want to do it off an image, remotely deploy it. So if you have like a DevOps method of doing this or scripted way of doing it, load it up, run your process, turn it off. So you got all the benefits of the memory box, all the benefits of having the flexibility to have it. You pay pretty much what you use and you turn it off. It's always a difficult thing that customers go through because they're just so used to buying things that are always on. Now you have to move toward a world that it's on when I need it, and sometimes it always needs to be on, but other things don't. And understand that strategy and automation, that can be very challenging. But there are things that you have to consider, and they're always coming out with new virtual machines, and not just type, right? So if you look at A and AV2, there's a second class. Sometimes the new class has better performance, the latest process. Sometimes they're even cheaper. So those are the things, again, that you have to take a look at. You know, the type of architecture you use for your virtual machines also makes a big impact, because you could just create virtual machines and put them wherever you want. They might even be on the same rack. But sometimes if you're going to have 2 servers, you're going to have a load balancer, you don't want them on that same rack. You want to explicitly say, I want you in a different zone, because if I go down, I don't need you going down at the same time. I may want us in 3 different racks. So I want a much higher SLA, and I can define that. And then if I want it even further, I can say within the same data center, in the same zone, I want us on different racks, and my other ones I want in a completely different data center. Again, this goes to networking, goes to regions and zones, so a lot of things you have to look at. You know, these are concerns in terms of for this particular topic, because maybe you've run into something like that. So it's important to just note that these are areas you should look at in terms of availability zones and regions and whatnot. Okay, when you take a look at the compute costs, using the calculator Microsoft provides, and the calculator has gotten pretty good. And even the costs are still, you're going to get the regular costs, but it's not always a one-to-one match, because you don't know, and how does it know what your network performance is going to be? You don't, but it's a place where you can start to kind of lay out what you think it might look at. There's a new capability called Azure Reserved Virtual Machine Instances. It's very much the same as reserved instances that AWS has. It requires a longer commitment. These are good for boxes that you know are going to stay the exact same size. They're always going to be on, and they're just going to be there. And you can use it with your hybrid benefits, which I'll talk about in a moment. So it's a very interesting way to help kind of lower your cost for things that you know are going to be there always on. I think the challenge is that you're kind of breaking your own little promise with flexibility in the environment. You can still turn it off and turn it back on. You can still do those sorts of strategies, but you're still not getting the most what you could be doing, because if you do a reserved instance and you say, well, maybe I want to move it up or do something else, you lose out on that cost benefit that you prepaid a while ago. So these are things we'd love to have a conversation with you on, of how you may want to use this. Then really the last bit, because it kind of breaks the other part, which is automate, 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 automate. You really should be automating things. Sometimes you need to automate because let's say you do have a server farm and for capacity, you want it to scale up or scale down. You can automate those things. You can do it based off of monitoring alerts. Like, hey, if we notice that our application hits this threshold, spin up new boxes. When it hits this other threshold, spin down boxes. But your application has to understand that, because it just needs to be, and understands it needs to be durable as it's doing that, but it can't be so dependent. So if my server goes up and down, I shouldn't break all the other servers. So you really have to think about your architectures when doing this. Hybrid benefits, if you have on-premise Windows servers today and you've already paid for the license, it has software assurance, and you go, man, I really want to use Azure, you can use that. And you'll pay basically what the Linux price is, because the Linux price is without the cost of the OS, the Windows operating system. So you get a lower price. So you get that, and so you get that particular benefit when you deploy those boxes. So it's a really great way to save money, because you really already spent that money. So I guess you're not, you're just kind of removing that cost, and now you're just paying the infrastructure cost. So really something to take a look at. So hybrid use rights are important. Constantly and continuously evaluate your compute usage and costs and prices. All right, storage. So I'm getting close to the home fronts here. So for storage costs, again, most of the times you're looking at IaaS. There's platform as a service. There's lots of different strategies here of how to use it. Really, this is another topic we're going to have for a different day. But storage costs are important, because the way that you use your storage, and even the type of durability you want for your storage, has a very big impact on your costs. There are some things that you say, hey, I'm going to go for the cheapest. I'm going to go for LRS. And in LRS, it's still in one region, but now if I get outage, how does that impact my business? I may want to go GRS and say, hey, you know what? If Microsoft's whole data center goes down within one region, I still want to be able to bring that content back up. And I might want to put my storage in with my compute capacity in the west, but I want all my backup stuff gone to the east. And so now you really start thinking about your recovery access, and then now you have to balance that out with the cost. So some people may have started a few years ago on GRS, but maybe don't need it. And now you're spending double the amount of storage costs than you need with LRS. So really, most customers need to have a blend of this. And there's even some new storage costs that are coming out that are even lower. That needs to be paid attention to. From a storage perspective, one of the biggest things that we hear from security is encryption. So, hey, I have all my stuff in the cloud, but man, is it safe? So you can absolutely turn on storage encryption. Microsoft manages the keys in the blob, so everything you put on disk actually goes into a blob. So you can control that, and now they have the capability to do customer managed encryption keys. I don't know if it's still in preview or not, but now you can actually manage the keys yourself. So again, this is what I'm saying. They're providing great security capabilities, and now even extending the key management out to you. Now, you're going to be responsible for them. You lose your keys or mismanage the keys, that's going to be a problem, but that's one that you're going to be willing to take on. And then there's encryption in transit. So this is making sure that communication between the cloud, from wherever you have your services and services into the cloud, are done in a secure, restful fashion. So again, these are more things that they're putting, and you can put policies on them as well. So you can make sure that when services are being used outside of Azure, that it's done, that you're enforcing that's done in a secure manner. So again, because right now you could do it via HTTP or HTTPS, as an administrator you can control it, but as a policy manager you want to be able to define that policy and enforce it. Okay, so network access control, this is where from your storage areas you want to be able to say that, hey, I have the storage, people can remotely access it, but I only want access from our corporate locations and one of our developers and one of our administrator locations. That's it. I don't want anybody else in the world to even get close to managing it. So again, further defining access, further defining encryption for in your environment. So these are all areas that are important. And then lastly, I think on the storage side is really around premium and storage disks. A lot of customers start with storage disks. You get paid for what you use. Premium disks are different because they provide higher IOPS, so it performs much faster. So you have the ability to get incredible performance on that. But now you buy, you're essentially renting that whole disk, whether you use it or not. So very different between the two. When you decide to use one versus the other, premium disks are really great for like line of business applications or disks that really need high I/O. So SQL servers are very popular. SAP servers are another one. CRM servers, any kind of a line of business application that's used to writing to disk, premium disk is probably the right way to go. If you have smaller deployments, standard disks might be good to use as well. Something you definitely want to test out either way. They have a very big impact in terms of cost. But again, that's that balance of cost versus performance. And then there's files, which I talked about a little bit earlier on. That's basically the SMB file share that's in the cloud. Okay, so in terms of getting back on track, your storage costs, your control, encrypting it at rest, encryption in transit are extremely extremely important. When you have to balance again cost versus performance. Each one of these areas has a big impact to what you do. Okay, so for Agile IT, one of the things that we really focus on, the reason why here as a CEO I'm talking about all these things is because we all really care about this in many different ways. And when we work with our customers, we hope that they're not looking for somebody who's just the cheapest laborer that can just get something done. We actually want to work together with you to understand your business, to stay aligned with you, to make sure that we're not just doing a patching a server or just monitoring that it's up or down. We want to work with you to have good strategies for your costs. We want to have good strategies with you in terms of your performance. The more we understand your business, the more we understand your usage, the better impact we can have on this. And these are things that, depending on your need and your changes in your organizations, we can talk more or less frequently in those things. So we always look to be a strategic partner, and we look for customers who are dedicated to doing more things in the cloud and that are looking for a strategic partner. For us as a business, Agile covers our managed services area. So we think about all these areas, these four slices of the pie, when looking at whether your data is in Azure, whether it's in Office 365, whether it's in both of those plus on-premise. You still have to think about, how do I protect my content? How do I protect those devices? How am I getting information on them? Am I getting, am I planning well? All these things come into account. No one customer is the same, but they are all very. There's a lot of commonality between them in terms of their need, their policies, all those sorts of things. So, you should definitely, if you can take a view of this slide and apply it to yourself, apply it with your hoster, work with us on it. Either way, you really have to care about each one of these for every single service you have, because they're different, and you really need to measure against that. For us, we know that when we manage, in order to be well secured, well managed, you have to look at all these different areas. So yes, we will help you manage mobile phones and desktops. Yes, we will help you manage your infrastructure if it's Azure on-prem with Windows Server, if it's AWS. Yes, we'll help you with your routers and firewalls, because all these things relate. At the same time, no, we don't have to do those things. No, we don't have to do everything. We try to fit and mold ourselves around the customer. But at the end of the day, we want to do things that we know you can be successful. So sometimes you get customer requests and we tell them no, because we just know it's not going to be successful. So for backups, we actually don't turn that on for customers to walk away. We will only turn it on and run it for them, because a lot of customers, or not a lot, but there's some customers who just want to turn on to feel good. 6 months later, it doesn't work. They come back to us and they're not happy. That's because it's not set up to be that way. You have to continuously check those things. That's why we do things like with Agile Protect, and we do your backup and restore. So wrapping up, these are some of the key areas that I would say that you really have to kind of dig into and learn more. We'd love to go on this journey with you. But again, really is a collection of tools and capabilities and policies. Everything that you have on here does require you to spend some time to configure, understand how it's going to be used. You don't want to create something that's so secure that nobody can use. It's a tough balance. We want maximum productivity with the maximum amount of security. Those are the things that we want, and it's so not easy to do that because they kind of fight with one another sometimes. So one of the things that we look at are, well, what are the scenarios? What challenge are we trying to offer? So if a customer says, hey, I just want to turn on threat analytics, like that's not enough information. Like what kind of challenges do you have? What's the broader security aspects that you might have, and taking that perspective. And I would encourage you to do the same thing with your business and looking at these pieces. So with that, I appreciate your time. I think I soaked up just about all the time that's here. If there's any questions left over, I will follow them up in email. We'll follow up an email with you guys as well as it relates to the slide content and link to the information in the future. So thank you again so much. Feel free to send me an email. Again, my name is Conrad Agremont. You can send me an email at conrad.a@agilet.com. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope this gets you back on track and makes you successful with your Azure deployment. Thank you.